listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plymer. Bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby. Sharing ideas to make the game better.
Welcome to episode 84 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plymer, and joining me today is Phil Llewellyn. Phil is an experienced coach, manager, educator, and administrator. He has worked in player development roles for both England and Ireland Rugby, as well as senior, minis, and junior sections with grassroots clubs. On top of this, he's also passionate about coach education and mentoring, and it's a pleasure to have him on the show. So welcome, Phil.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no worries. So you're back in the UK. You were in BC for a little while, which we'll talk about later in the interview. But you're back in the UK, mate. How's it going over there, mid-COVID?
Yeah, no, it's been pretty good, to be fair. Like, the weather's been nice. I've seen the sun probably more in the last 3 weeks than I did maybe in the whole time I was in BC. But I'm not waking up with a view of the mountains every morning. So there's, pros and cons. I would say that for sure.
For sure.
No, it's actually, in my little bubble, everyone's been good. So it's actually been nice just to spend a bit of time catching up with people and just talking rugby. And, everyone's been in that boat, which has been pretty cool in lots of ways.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and we'll get into that later on. But to start with, when did you first start playing rugby? What was your backstory there, and how did you progress?
So I started when I was 7. And it's actually, it's quite a funny story because I had the first session I went to was at Midsummer Norton Rugby Club. So we lived just outside of Bath in England at the time. Mm-hmm. And the first session, coach just grabbed me and we got stuck into things. And I mean, this was, what was this, like 91? Mm-hmm. So coaching wasn't particularly advanced at the time at junior level. And I think the first game we played was the old Bulldog game. So
perfect.
I've never played rugby before, and he's like, right, you're the new kid, in the middle, off you go, and we're doing full contact tackling.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the hell is this? So came away from the session, absolutely hated it. Said to my parents, I'm not going back. And then I think he might have been the assistant coach, or the coach changed. And it was a friend of the family who was then the head coach or took over. And basically, mum and dad convinced me to have another go, and genuinely have never looked back since. And it's been my hobby, my career the whole time. But I do often wonder what would have happened if I'd never gone back, because my life would be very, very different.
Yeah, it's crazy, the impact that a coach can make there.
Huge. Like that's a massive sliding doors moment, I think. So, but yeah, so that was like my first session. I played all the way through kind of local club rugby, college with mates and school and all that type of stuff. Mm-hmm. And as most people do, you just get a brilliant friendship group from that. Did some rep stuff, was fortunate enough to play for England colleges and represent England in some age group stuff, which was awesome. And then did a year in New Zealand. So I was out in Hamilton with the Waikato Uni Club, which was cool. And then I was retired with a bad back by the time I was 23.
Oh, ouch.
So I prolapsed the disc. Was out for 12 months with that, which was pretty tough. Came back the next season. I think I did like 5 games at the start of the season and was kind of wearing flip-flops for a couple of days after the game because I couldn't bend over to tie my shoes. And I was like, if I want to walk when I'm 50, let alone do anything else, I probably need to knock this on the head. So, yeah, I was fortunate. I got really well coached. I learned a lot about the game in actually what was a pretty short playing career. But, yeah.
Yeah, right. That obviously that you're connected with the game, retiring that early and still heavily involved with it now. So speaks to the power of the game. So when did you first get into coaching, and what were those big lessons early on for you that you realised how you needed to adjust as a coach?
Coaching would have started, I'd have probably been 16, 17. So yeah. I think just after I'd left school, got to college and was on one of those kind of practical courses at college where they just they ask you to get involved in volunteering and doing all that type of stuff and learning some skills, which was awesome. So I think the first thing I ever coached was just tag rugby with like tiny little kids, and that was loads of fun. Like, really had no idea what I was doing. Was just, it was like herding cats. Like you're trying to just keep them engaged, make sure they're having a bit of fun, trying to get them to pass and catch the ball and all that type of stuff. And kind of just went from there really, which was good. The course definitely helped. I was learning a lot about just how to interact with people. I did my RFU level 1. That was, beneficial in starting to understand some of the mechanisms and the pedagogy and all that type of stuff. Although, I'd have had no idea that's what it was called at the time.
Yeah.
And so I'd done kind of a fair bit of rep stuff, like junior rep stuff, 15s and 16s, and been an assistant in lots of places and just done lots of hours. And then by the time I got to 23, so I think I had the final chat with the physio on a Tuesday night about that was me done, and I was finished playing. And I started my first senior coaching job on the Thursday of that week.
Perfect.
So I was pretty fortunate. I never had that time away from the game. Yeah, I know a lot of people struggle with that, and not being in an environment. I literally just rolled straight through, which was really good in lots of ways because it just kept me engaged. But it was also, I look back now on those first couple of years as a senior coach, and I'm like, wow, I don't think I'd have wanted to be coached by me at that point. Not that I didn't do some good things, but you know what I mean? You just cringe, don't you? Just the way you would have spoken to people and what you focused on and why you did that. It was just, I had no understanding of the craft, I don't think, at that point. And it was all technical, tactical. It was all, this is how we're going to play the game. And it wasn't about culture. It was just, what are we going to do on the field? How are we going to structure things? I need you to do this because it's my way. And I'd like to think it's come a long way since then. But it's, it is interesting how you evolve and how you learn. And I think the biggest, I often see people put on Twitter like, oh, what would you tell yourself when you started coaching that would make it easier? And I think that biggest one for me would be, it's about people.
Yeah.
Like, I really wish I'd understood that, like, right from the off, that you've just got to be really, really good with people and developing relationships. And I think that would have made just the whole job not only just way more enjoyable, but just a lot simpler and a lot easier, I think. So
yeah, I would have told myself, don't be an arsehole. That would have been my little post-it note message. Because same, like my first couple of years, very cringeworthy, very, even though I'd come from a teaching background and the session plans were reasonably well structured, but I was coaching like I was teaching, and even more intense. I had a couple of turning moments where I'm like, whoa, this has got to go a different way because I'm not enjoying it, and those guys definitely aren't enjoying it either. So I think that's huge, the relationships with your players and how you build that and foster it.
100%. And I think the challenge at the time, being really young and a very inexperienced coach, when I was coaching players that were older than me, that probably had a lot more experience in the game than me, that was a real, I probably wasn't too daunted by it, but it was a real challenge in learning how to, get kind of develop respect with them and get them on board with new ideas and all that type of stuff. And I don't know, I was probably arrogant or confident enough, I'm not sure which one, to kind of just muddle my way through that, fake it till you make it type thing. But I'd love to go back with even, half the knowledge I have now and revisit that, because it'd be pretty different, I think.
Yeah. At the same time, though, that's what drives learning, is that experience and knowing, well, I really messed that up and I've got to get better, otherwise I've got to stop doing this. Yeah. I think there's one, I know we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but I got asked in an interview once, what was my biggest mistake in coaching?
it really threw me, because it's not a very common question, I think, to get asked in an interview. And I couldn't answer at the time. And when you just walk out of the room and suddenly it hits you, like I literally sat there for a couple of minutes, like I don't know what to tell you here. And he was like, I think I asked, could we come back to it? And even at the end, when he came back to it, I was like, I still can't give you a good answer. And I must have just got in the car to drive off. And I was like, that's what it was. And one of the clubs I was involved with, I just didn't engage at all. I probably didn't really like the people, and I don't think they really liked me, so I didn't stay around after the games. I didn't want to speak to lots of them and listen to their opinions, and we didn't win. And that combination, I think they sacked me in the December. Funnily enough, they won the week after they sacked me, but then they didn't win for the rest of the season. But in their mind, I'm sure that one win was justifiable for getting rid of me. Yeah. But I learned so many lessons from that. And the next club I went to, I was taking players up with me from uni, and they would hate it, because I'd be like, all right, okay, we're going to leave in 5 minutes. And they're like, it won't be 5 minutes. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, well, you've got to say goodbye to everybody in the room. And I literally would go around and take everybody's hand and make sure everyone was, happy and all that type of stuff. And I probably went over, but that cemented me within that club, and the relationships I had, and the ability I had to bring people on board with new ideas and stuff. It was chalk and cheese, absolutely chalk and cheese. So
cool. Yeah, well, as bad as those mistakes are, and you don't want them to happen, they're good that they happen. So, they don't keep me up at night anymore. So that's good news. In the introduction, I mentioned you had some development roles with England and Ireland Rugby. What did those look like in a day-to-day kind of setting?
So the England Rugby role was a player development officer. Yeah. So was in a team of 4 or 5 of us, and we basically take a geographic area each within the UK, and would work on player and playing development. So player development was effectively the aspirational pathway. So the England kind of counties program, under 18s, under 20s, England students, senior England counties, the developing player program that the Premiership clubs run. So we were involved in kind of managing that. And then playing development was transition work with clubs, how to engage more people in the game, how to retain more players, looking at kind of some of the research around motivations for playing, all that kind of bolt-on stuff, and then trying to come up with some actual practical implementations and solutions that clubs could look at and put in place to keep those people involved and keep growing the game. So,
and what would they be? What would be some of the big ones there? Because that's definitely an area that a lot of clubs would be crying out for some help.
Yeah, so a lot of it talked around lifestyle. We looked at the fact that actually 3 o'clock on a Saturday is quite possibly the worst time on a weekend to now play a fixture. People have got to work, got families. We know everyone's just got other commitments. So if you've got facilities, our Friday night or Wednesday night games, better option. Yeah. So we looked at implementing those kind of bridging gap teams. So can you put 4 or 5 games on a season that are under 23 that are shifting your Colts into that slightly senior demographic, but without basically plucking an 18-year-old out from a Colts team and plonking them straight in a first team change room, and them going rugby up until now has always been about playing with my mates, and suddenly I'm sat in a room and I have no mates. That change in the environment for those individuals, I understand why clubs get caught up in they're our next best player, we need to get them involved, but I don't think we transition particularly effectively. We don't really develop that connection between the Colts and those senior teams, and we probably don't manage the senior players down in terms of them recognising the impact some of their potential behaviours have on younger players around them. So solutions like clubs having just mentees, so younger, if you were an under 25, you'd pick up a Colt and you'd kind of befriend them. It might be somebody through school stuff anyway, or just a new person, but you'd engage them, and if you after training and stuff, you'd have conversations with them, and lots of things around how you overcome those challenges that I think everybody faces, really.
Yeah, without a doubt. And the Ireland rugby role.
Ireland was interesting. So the World Rugby change in terms of international player eligibility from 3 to 5 years kind of created the program for Ireland, which they called Irish Qualified Rugby, so IQ Rugby, and that was looking specifically at Irish qualified players globally that are outside of Ireland. So it was about identifying. And I was really naive to this. I think the research says there's something like 18 Irish expats abroad to every one person that lives in Ireland.
Yeah, massive.
Which is a huge population of Irish qualified people abroad. So the role was very simply supporting the team and coordinating some of that ID stuff, predominantly based in England, just because of the player numbers. But we would be identifying them with people in the States, in Australia, in New Zealand, Dubai, anywhere that they were eligible and they were interested. We were putting them on our database and working with them and developing them with a view to ultimately making a call on were they good enough to play for Ireland at age group, and then potentially get a contract with a province and move through. So that was really unique, really interesting, a really nice challenge as well.
Yeah, cool. Sounds fascinating. Awesome. Well, you spent some time very recently in Canada. You were over in British Columbia, in Vancouver, with the old boys. Can you talk a little bit about your brief stint in Canada and what were some of your observations from a rugby standpoint over this part of the world?
Canada was what an experience in rugby terms. Just in terms of a country. So my contract in Ireland finished the start of August in 2019. And it was just one of those windows, I guess, you get very rarely in life where no mortgage, no kids, no wife. I just up and go and live somewhere and experience that place for 6-8 months. And Canada ended up being the destination of choice.
Well, the same thing was for me, but now I have a wife, a mortgage, and kids. So
it got you
for sure. Yeah. All right. Sorry, go.
No, all good. Old boys were awesome. So I think I pretty much emailed every rugby club in Canada and just said, like, this is who I am. This is my experience. I'm going to come over. I'm only going to be able to be on a visitor visa, as tragically I'm too old for the working holiday 2-year one. So, could you put me up if I coach for nothing? And some of them came back to me. Old boys were one of them, and just said, this is the deal we offer. We can put you up. There's a hostel just across the road from the training pitch and the clubhouse and stuff, right on the beach, which is view of the mountains, like just phenomenal. And so my role with them was kind of assistant coach with the seniors, doing some kind of coach education and mentoring with the senior coaches, and then I was leading the kind of the 17s and the 19s program as well, and then doing coach education with the junior coaches. So really nice to be able to see senior rugby and kind of Colts underage rugby as well, and get involved in both elements there. And then was fortunate enough to do some of the rep stuff with the BC squads for the sevens, for the under 18s and the under 16s, sevens, and then also got involved with UBC, doing a bit of player development and coach development with them. So it was pretty fun just to try to, I went not really knowing anybody, but just put myself out there as a resource in terms of if I could come in and be helpful somewhere, I was keen to do that, because it also meant I just got to see a load of different rugby environments and meet a load of new people and understand the game in another country. And it was a real insight. And fascinatingly, I actually think a lot of the problems are the same. I was, there's some geographical issues obviously that Canada has and how they affect things, but transition still the same. The opportunity I actually think it's a bigger challenge in Canada, just the opportunity to do other stuff. Like if you're a kid in Vancouver or a teenager, oh my God, do you know, like Whistler's just up the road. You've got 3 ski mountains on your doorstep. You've got beach sports on your doorstep. You've got the North American sports. You've got the kind of the Commonwealth sports. I mean, there literally isn't anything you can't do. And how rugby then attracts and retains those players, I think is a huge challenge. And I talked a lot when I was there about trying to get the level of delivery to a stage where it's kind of it's almost bypassed a generation. So in my view, and I guess a lot of the research would support this, you ultimately coach how you've been coached. And I think UK, we've now seen there's a number of, I would say, like verging on world-class coaches that have come through and are still very, very young, but they've progressed so quickly because of how well they were coached by the people they were coached by.
Yeah,
I think the challenge I saw in BC is, with the greatest will in the world, and people are still, brilliant volunteers, I would say the quality of that, or the relevancy of some of what they were doing, is still quite behind the times. And I think you've got to find a way to progress that and actually get some really kind of modern delivery into those players. So by the time that they finish and become coaches, they're coaching in a way that they were coached, not effectively just kind of repeating a cycle. And that's a huge challenge with the finances available and the resource and everything else. But
100%.
Yeah, from a performance angle, I coming in blind to this, I just didn't realize how much of a challenge the player pathway is beyond club rugby. And I think the Pride has been a really good intervention, but I think the challenge with how the Pride works, I guess, is that they're still playing in the BC competition. So it's not much as the training environment might be professional, it's not a playing offer that is beyond anything else that anyone can get. I guess, MLR is that kind of next jump, but are people going to relocate all the way, 1,000 miles across the country for that opportunity? I'm not sure. So whereas I guess in comparative terms, the UK has got the national leagues, it's got the championship, it's got a number of levels, quite strong levels in between that and professional rugby. It's got Bucks, Super Rugby, all that type of stuff. Going into BC and seeing that, okay, if you're a really good 18, 19, 20-year-old, what do you do after club rugby? How do you go on to play for Canada? And I remember having that conversation with some of the players, and I was just like, do you guys, do you have dreams of being professional rugby players? And these are some of the 16, 17-year-old lads. And they're like, yeah, of course we do. And I was like, how do you see that happening? And they're just like, nah, I got no idea. It's just a dream. And that was a real eye opener that there just isn't. Yes, okay, it's only going to be for the 0.5% that make it anyway. But I think in England, most people would be able to tell you how that pathway works and where you'd need to go and what you'd need to do. Whereas for these kids, they're just, nah, I would love to do it. Even if I'm good enough, I couldn't tell you how I get there. And I don't know if anyone's got the solution for that at the moment. But that's a unique challenge just because of the geography and the finance and everything else, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. All right, cool. Well, you recently did, this is kind of why we got in touch. I reached out to you. You did a webinar on that was hosted by Coach Logic. And if listeners want to check that out, if you go to Coach Logic's website in their clubhouse there, I think you have to sign up to be a temporary member, a free trial, but you can access that webinar in the clubhouse. The webinar was titled, Coaching Defence in the Community Game. What was your reason for making that distinction about the community game with regards to defence?
Two reasons really. So I think a lot of the stuff that's been out there, as it probably does, is just kind of based around the pro game. So There's a lot of insight. There's a lot of people commenting on it. There's a real attraction to getting ex-professional players or kind of, you know, current professional coaches in to talk about things, which is awesome, because it gives us an insight into what the pro game looks like. And for good reason, the professional rugby is quite secretive about some of the stuff they do, and everyone wants to kind of, you know, stand on the step and look over the wall and learn about that and see what they're doing behind closed doors. But for 95% of the coaching population, we would operate in a community environment. Yeah. So that was kind of number one. And then secondly, it was just really to maybe give coaches an opportunity to listen to, I want to say, I would say some of my ideas, but more some of just some kind of challenging questions, learning maybe from my experiences within the community game that I've had, and just how my thinking has changed. So a little bit of a kind of a dual approach, just to tweak it slightly and say, pro rugby is great, but I would argue the game they play is not the game that the majority of us are involved with. So can we make it a little bit more relevant? Can maybe that inspire more people to share more stuff, and also maybe remove some of the mystique around defence? I think there's lots of people that are always willing to talk and share stuff around attack, whereas defence, maybe because it's a little bit more process driven in some ways, defence coaches tend to kind of go, this is my system, like I'm not going to share this because this gets me jobs and wins teams, you know, leagues or championships or whatever. So they're less willing to share. And I was kind of like, well, nothing I do is a secret. Like there's no magic wand. Like nothing's going to be that new to anybody. It's just how I apply it. So that was the two main reasons.
Yeah, well, talking about systems, you covered a couple of systems. The two main ones that listeners would probably be using and experimenting with is Drift and Blitz. If you were to think about one or two really key points for those two systems that coaches probably need to understand in order to apply those systems, what would they be in your regard?
So I talked a lot about, as simple as I can make defence is ultimately it's about decision making in relative terms to time and space. Mm-hmm. And I think we probably, I know I've not been explicit enough in explaining that to people when I've talked about it before. And I think the better the players' understanding of the decisions we make within the time and space that we're affording the attack is absolutely crucial. So then there's a number of influences and other factors that are going to kind of come into that decision. So it would be pretty rare that you're gonna blitz if your number's down, for example. Mm-hmm. You could, but it's more high risk. Mm-hmm. But understanding the space, the time, why you'd want to use a touchline as your extra defender, for me then becomes quite crucial. Knowing, so the teams I would work with, we would only ever blitz if the attacker in the 15-meter channel. Yeah. Because they only can play, they can literally only play one way. We know we can get into the outside, set up on their outside shoulder, that we're then defending the player and we can see the ball at the same time. So it just gives us a far better opportunity to shut down the threats. Mm-hmm. So I think those would be the key elements for me. Blitzing at other times is a little bit more high risk. It's not something, I think you've got to be super fit to do it. And again, at the community, it's probably not something I would want to spend that much time trying to get them used to. I think that the level of understanding of when you do it and how you do it, definitely for some of the clubs I've been at, would be beyond their capabilities. Mm-hmm. Others no, but I think it tends to then drift towards not necessarily being one approach suits all, actually kind of building that hybrid of when do we want to do what's going to be most effective based on the picture in front of us.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to go on to next. Firstly, I think from my experiences running a blitz, I'd want to be with the club for at least a season before actually looking to implement that, because, like you say, the fitness requirements are big. The understandings of when and where to do it are key, and also just having that collective kind of terminology and understanding of this is what we're doing where. that for me, that would be it. And that's why I really like the hybrid system too. This is my second year with a university team, so then now's the time to kind of add more content and upskill the players in that player education area around defence. So I like the idea of a hybrid system. Can you talk a little bit about that? What that was and your ideas there?
Yeah, so the hybrids I guess it does what it says on the tin. It's ultimately combining the strengths of all of the available systems or the principles that underlie the systems. So I would definitely coach far more. The language would be around principles in terms of go forward and applying pressure, and then the time and the space and the decision making. And we're just, I think our view, or the biggest change that I've had in my perspective, and then discussing that with the other coaches I've worked with where we've done this, was we just got to be very good at defending the picture in front of us. A system, to my mind, would imply that we have a set solution to a set picture. We kind of sat down and we looked at some of the stuff we were getting right, and then a lot of the stuff we were getting wrong. We just said that there's too many pictures. It's just too complicated, that you can't have a set solution for every picture that the board you. So actually then you kind of, so that's real in the detail. So then you take a slightly, a little bit of a step back and you go, well, now we're going to start to group. So if they do maybe X, Y, or Z, our solution is this. But then we kind of went another step back and went, well, actually, are we then asking them to maybe still be thinking about, do I need to be, the guard or the bodyguard or the A or the B or the C or whatever, rather than just going, how many people are in front of me? How far am I from the guy inside me or outside me? How quick's the ball? Who's at 9? Can we actually just develop them to be really good defensive decision makers, understanding the cues, getting them working hard enough and fast enough that they've got time to organise that? So I talk about, defending ahead of the speed of the ball. I see lots of players and lots of defenders be ready just as the ball goes. To my mind, you're behind the ball there. You've not had time to organise. You've not had time to have a rest. You've not had time to talk to anybody or look or scan or whatever. We want to be there as quickly as we can, give yourself as much time to do all of that organisational stuff, to move people around or to check what the pitch is going to be, and then be in a position to apply a solution. And so, the hybrid ultimately comes down to just moving away from there is one set way to do this. It's saying we want to be appropriately spaced. That's probably a bit wider than the drift. It might not be as wide as a blitz, but just managing that space. If they've got a pod of 4 guys off 9, then we're going to need to condense and pull some numbers tighter to manage the threat, because it's probably going to go there. If they've got a load of guys pushing in that wider channel, then actually we don't necessarily need to stack that channel with numbers if we defend the ball. So this is where the ball watching defence starts to come in. It doesn't matter if I've got 3 guys in my channel and I'm the 13. The ball can only go to one of them. But as long as I recognise the cues and I'm connected with the guys that are kind of inside me and outside me, I should be in a good position. If that guy, the guys on the hard lines are pretty lazy, or their hands are down, or they do it too early, I'm not getting caught up in defending people I don't need to defend. I'm just going to follow that ball and put myself in a better position to execute tackles. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think we overlook that decision making aspect with defence. A lot of coaches do, and attack is all about decision making. But I'm 100% on board with helping our defence become decision makers and putting them in situations at practice where they've got to make a multitude of decisions and then reflecting on which ones were right and which ones didn't work and which ones did work. Yeah, I agree. And I heard some people, saw some people talking after the Stuart Lancaster webinar, and his language was interesting because someone asked him about creativity in defence and setting traps and stuff, and he was like, "Oh, it's very brave." And I kind of we almost think of defence as groupthink.
Mm-hmm.
His point was everyone needs clarity on what you're going to do or what you're trying to achieve. And I would 100% agree with that. You absolutely do. But I don't think, and I'm not suggesting he said this, but I guess the extension of that is people then think everybody needs to think and act in the same way. And the system, the defensive system, does that thinking for you. And that's the bit I would disagree with any coach that thinks that way, that is just system. Yeah. To me, you still need to be flexible within that to recognize where the threat is, or, you know, what's the cue for the fact they might kick or run or pass, I'm not sure. I've definitely been in that place where I was, no, the system sorts everything out. You don't need to worry, just trust the system, because this is what we do every single time. And then when somebody, as soon as an attack works that out and the system doesn't work, all the players are looking at you like, well, you said trust the system, and now it ain't. And so what the hell's going on? So I think going the other way and saying these are our principles. We still know what we want to achieve. We still know we want to go forward. We still know we want to get the ball back. We still know we want to put them under pressure, force errors, all those types of things. And then layering in the detail around how you create that, I think, is the biggest thing.
Yeah, and I also think we've got to make room for X-factor players as well. We always talk about X-factor players in attack and the damage they can do, but what about X-factor players in defence? Like how a game can be turned by an intercept or a really, you know, fast, aggressive shooting defender to take the legs out way behind the game line. That can turn a game.
Yeah,
and if they can be stifled by a system.
100%. And we naturally, I guess, drift towards thinking about back rows being good at jackals. But I've been in clubs where some of the front rowers, like the hookers, were superb over the ball. But actually all we'd ever be telling them is, I want you at guard 1 or 2 or whatever you want to call them. And you're just going, actually, but this guy's like really good at just sitting behind the line and being the second guy in over the ball. So why are we not creating a process or a system or a philosophy where he can do what's best for him, because ultimately that's best for the team. And that rigid thinking I think can put you in some holes of your own making, which probably isn't a great place to be.
Yeah, and I've definitely done it too. So actually one of my favourite parts of the webinar was where you raised the idea about, you know, can we move away from the ABC or the 1, 2, 3 or the guard, whatever you want to call it, and just that if you find yourself in that position, here's the possibilities that you're going to have in front of you. Well, I really like that. My last year of coaching, I actually moved away from that. I made it I hate to use the word rule, but I made it a rule that the previous concept was if you're in the 1 position or the guard position, you're there and everyone has to move around you. My theory was we were going to get tested on the fold, and I didn't find any sense in that. I found that you should be able to move that person out to create width in your defence. And it was successful, but it was also very challenging in that the athletes, they had never heard of this before. They'd never tried it before, and some were fine with it, but some were very uncomfortable with the concept of removing that structure. What was your goal there? You know, planting that seed, and how, if coaches were interested in exploring that with their teams, how would you recommend they go about it?
It's a really good question. I think that probably highlights how much of our time as coaches is spent changing minds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
the players will come to us at whatever level. Certainly, if it's senior or university or that kind of age, where they maybe have done 10 or 12 years of this is the way to do something. And I think if I went back to when I was coaching, junior rugby and that type of stuff, I think one of the big learnings for me would be, let's get them just to learn 4 or 5 ways of doing everything, because that's going to make them a better player. Like, you can't. I don't think junior coaches having hard and fast rules about X or Y or Z, I really don't think is helpful. And I'd love just to see more younger players exposed to more variance in how they do everything, because then they can choose what's going to be most effective in what game, and then they can also be in a position to be of greater benefit to whatever senior environment they end up in. So I definitely think it's about selling the message. I genuinely remember some stand-up arguments because boys were like, this is how I've always done it. Like, why I'm wrong? And I'm like, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying maybe there's a different way to do this. And that was about just finding some good evidence. So a number of clips of us being beaten on the outside because the first guys are parked up right next to a breakdown when there was no threat of the 9 running, or it wasn't even 9 there or something like that. It was just some getting the ball out, those types of things. Then putting them in an environment where they were challenged but not uncomfortable, and that was I definitely got that wrong in terms of I've probably just gone out and gone, here's something new. I'm just going to stretch you like well beyond where you're capable or comfortable, because that's what I think is good for you. And actually not recognizing that if you then constantly fail because you're so far out of your comfort zone, you don't know what to do, that isn't going to fill you with confidence of my new idea or the new idea is a good thing.
Yeah.
I come back to, scaffolding is a popular term at the moment, or building blocks, or however you want to kind of label it. Just building that in and going, I'm going to stretch you a little bit, and actually maybe just you doing something new is a stretch. So I need to support you in recognizing that decision of when you're coming around the corner, what do you need to do? You need to scan. You need to communicate. You need to start thinking about the picture that the attacker presenting you. Then you're going to make a decision off of that, or you're going to be influenced by somebody else because of what they've seen. Once they've done that in games, in a practice, under pressure, whatever, then I think it's about progressing that to make them a little bit more, stretch them again. So just giving some more evidence. If we're doing it well in a game, supporting that with some good feedback and saying this is how it's helping us. And I guess at some stage you're really hoping that they take on that responsibility for driving it forward, and them embedding that into their own personal development, something to want to get better with. You've kind of, you've planted the seed, you've watered it and you've looked after it and you've pruned it, but now to really grow, they've got to take it on themselves and kind of manage it and take it as far as it can be taken, I guess. Yeah,
cool. All right, and just last one on the webinar that you did. Often when you do presentations and even podcasts, for me, I'll walk away from it going, I missed an opportunity there. I should have spoken about this, or I could have elaborated on that. Reflecting on your presentation, was there anything in particular that you feel you could have grabbed or that you could build from in the future?
Yeah, there's some really good questions that probably didn't get covered. So one of the ones was around what is the place for technique training in events, and I didn't talk about too much of that, probably deliberately, because it went on for an hour and a half, which was way too long for anyone to listen to me. But he just didn't want to get too hung up in the detail. I wanted it to keep it a bit kind of broader picture. But it was a really good question around how do we develop technique, understanding principles, systems as the players grow and improve, kind of as an age group from under sevens all the way through to seniors. At what point do you start to layer in more technique work, more kind of system work or process work or principle work? And that's something I'm going to try and explore in another podcast. So we're going to do a roundtable discussion with a couple of coaches. So one from a school, one from a uni, one from a club, and just get some other people's thoughts on defence in the community game.
Sweet.
That's me. I'm actually going to ask the questions, which would be quite nice. And try and kind of actually, for a school coach, at what point are they introducing some really good technical tackling work? How do they implement that, and how does that kind of fit around that process? My view of that, you'd want to start with good technique and some just good connection stuff. So I wouldn't be mentioning systems or anything like that until 16, 17. I don't think they necessarily need to know it. I think they need to know the principles. I'd always be talking about principles, but actually if we've got really good technical tacklers and people that have got good defensive footwork, I think that will solve so many of the problems that we probably encounter or I certainly have encountered at senior level with players that just get stepped, or they struggle to slow down enough to chop their feet to be an effective tackler and those types of things. So that's definitely one. I think it reinforced my view that as we talked about earlier, we need to be better at coaching decision making in defence and actually just use that language. What is defensive decision making? That's not language I hear a lot. So that's a big one. And then probably a little bit around just kind of certain solutions for certain pitches. Can we start to apply principles to what those pitches look like and take a step back from the detail rather than trying to find a solution to every different picture, try and go slightly the other way. So there's loads to come from it. And I guess the last one, which I'm trying to put together as a slide deck to kind of just send out, is where do we learn the fundamentals of defence? If you didn't play at a particularly high level or you weren't particularly well coached around D, how do you know how a drift works? How do you know blitz works or ball watching works? And just some of that type of thing, I think there's not a lot of resources that I've seen. So I'm just trying to produce something that would be for, I guess, kind of, in new coaches that don't have that kind of knowledge, is just something they can start to look at and refer to and go, oh, here's some ideas and here's the very basics of these different structures or processes that some people will use.
Cool. Sounds great. Well, speaking of coaches, getting some ideas, we had a listener question from Harry Curtin. He's just from looking at his Twitter handle, he's an Aussie. So he's coaching at Burnaby Lake. So I hope you're okay with one, answering an Aussie's question, and two, answering someone who coaches at Burnaby Lake their question. But his question was, do you have a practical example of a coaching game on the defensive transition between conceding a line break and then regaining the ideal defensive connection? I thought that was a pretty cool question, because that's something that happens fairly regularly. Well, you'd hope it wouldn't happen fairly regularly in your defence, but it does happen. And how do you regain that defensive line connection?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I was fortunate to work with Harry for the for the PC stuff. And yeah, I'm not sure if I wanted to give him too good an answer, because if Burnaby beat boys in the playoff with using this, I'd be shot, I think. So
yeah.
No, it's a really good question. My thought drifted to you probably want to kind of create some sort of game where there's lots of line breaks. So whether you're actually manipulating that, immediate thought would be kind of 2-touch.
Yeah.
1 touch you can carry on the second touch. I would probably try and make that a grab or even go live. So if I run through the line once, I can't offload, but I can make a line break. Now I know as soon as I'm through the line, it's live contact, because I definitely want to see what the defence did around buying time with that tackle. So made a line break, defender comes in, whoever it might be, bang, tackle on your feet, breakdowns live. How can you stall that attack while staying legal from a line break with a breakdown to just buy everybody time to get back and get organised? Other ways to create that might be even some kind of secret rules that attackers don't have to stop on the touch and can just make line breaks, or some defenders can't make a touch or something like that. But I think any way you can create a situation where there's lots of line breaks and they're in behind you regularly will just give players a really good opportunity to work on not just that tackle and not just slowing it down. But I think I used a clip in the presentation where there's six of my defenders are all running back looking at the breakdown.
Yeah.
Actually, you'd want to just expose them to that opportunity loads and loads of times, so they work back to where the threat is. They work back to defend the numbers, defend the picture, rather than that traditional I know the breakdown's important, so I'm just going to focus on that, and that's going to be the centre of my attention, and I'm not going to work out that I've drifted 6, 7, 8 yards towards it, and suddenly the space is all the way on my outside. So, yeah, I definitely think being able to create those breaks, create opportunities for players to have to work back to a breakdown that is a long way behind them, and then adapt to those pitches and just challenge the attack around. Just challenge the attack around what playing differently. Actually, from a line break, most people, I guess, would say, "Can we play wide?" I might just ask the attack to go, "Yeah, okay, maybe for the first 2 or 3, play wide quickly off the breakdown. Then let's look to attack quite narrow and just see if they recognise that there's going to be a change and mix up the attacking picture so it's just posing different questions to the defence."
Okay, great, awesome. Well, I hope that helps Harry and Burnaby Lake.
Not too much.
Perfect. All right, mate. Well, we always end the show with the same final 4 questions. When you were first exposed to rugby, or in those early days playing, who was one of the players that really stood out to you that you thought was pretty cool?
Bobby Skinstad was the South African 8 at the time, and just loads of pace, really good skills. He was a real hero, and I'd like to think I tried to model myself on how he played, but I didn't have the pace or the skills. So in my head, it was a good fit, and he was a good looking lad. So I think I was completely the opposite. But how he played the game was just awesome, and I was always a big fan. Yeah,
and top 3 coolest names in rugby too. I feel Bobby Skinstad. Pretty sweet name. Awesome. What about now? Who are some of the players you like watching?
So good couple for me over the last kind of 2 years, 18 months since they broke on the scene, would be Tom Curry and Sam Underhill. Really enjoyed how they kind of revolutionised England's back row. Yep. I think England went from having this 6.5 problem that Eddie talked about to suddenly having, too many sevens to actually fit in the team, and
Phil
and
Ward,
now,
George Smith kind of set up.
playing left and right, and just the difference in what they bring to the game has been pretty awesome to see.
Yeah, I like Tom Curry. I'm reading Eddie Jones's autobiography right now, and he's identified Tom Curry as, like, when he first saw Tom Curry play, he had the same feelings of him as his potential when he first saw George Smith play. So that's a pretty massive endorsement. Cool. And what about coaches? Who are some of the high profile coaches that you like what they're doing?
If I'm honest, I don't think I have a favourite coach. I like to try and just take snippets from everybody. And as much as I'm always open to new ideas, I'll always try and be critical. I've always I've tried to be in that mould of everything's a good idea, but context is crucial. You can't just be taking what everybody else does and just blindly applying it to your environment. Naturally, we would always want to try things and see how they feel and how they work, but I don't think it's just a case of borrowing from everybody else for the sake of it. I think you've got to be willing to, even professional coaches, and just go, look, it works for them in their environment, but that isn't. So I don't think I have a favourite coach. I guess you kind of align with people that have similar thoughts or biases to you, but I actually really like trying to find the good stuff in the coaches that don't have the same mindset as me, because that challenges me more than someone agreeing with me, which is cool.
Yeah, cool, good answer. And final question: what about a coach in the grassroots around your area that deserves recognition for the work they're doing?
So lad that springs to mind is Ben Wills. So he's the current coach at Reading RFC. I worked with Ben when I was at the RFU, and for a young guy and still a relatively new coach, I just find his passion is hugely inspiring. He's got a massive desire to learn and develop, and he's just incredibly mature for how young he is. And I kind of wish that I'd probably had some of that when I was as young as he was. Yeah. So no, he's great, and he's so willing just to listen to feedback, and take it on, but again, just be critical of the information he's given from everybody. He'll ask everybody, but he won't blindly follow it. He'll work out what works for him, and to have that skill as at the stage he's at in his journey will I hope will serve him really well as he moves forward.
Cool, awesome. All right, Phil. Well, it's been great having you on the show, mate. Really appreciate you spending time with us to talk about defence and your time in Canada as well. So, want to thank you for that, and all the best in the future. And hopefully, we get a rugby season sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, no worries. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us via Twitter at RugbyCoachesCNR or via the website therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.